If you cry easily, you have probably been labeled as weak, overly dramatic, or entirely too sensitive. But this sudden physical reaction has absolutely nothing to do with emotional fragility or personal weakness. The real psychological reason is completely different from the lie society has been telling you for years. Today, I am going to reveal the fascinating, hidden psychology behind people who cry incredibly easily. Imagine a simple scenario. A completely normal conversation suddenly shifts and becomes just a little bit tense. It is not a massive argument or a dramatic fight, but your throat immediately tightens up. Your eyes start to burn, and before you even realize it, you are violently fighting back tears. You desperately try to hide it, force an awkward laugh, and quickly change the uncomfortable subject. And then the overwhelming shame hits you. You sit there quietly thinking, why am I like this? That painful, haunting question echoes in your mind for hours, days, and sometimes even long weeks. There is a deeply rooted cultural myth that crying easily is a glaring sign of emotional instability. But this idea does not come from science. It comes from a society that worships silent suffering. Crying is not a character flaw. It is an immediate biological response when something hits too deeply. While average people only process how they felt hours later, you process complex emotions in real time. Your brain doesn't neatly file things away for later. It deeply feels, processes, and releases everything simultaneously. Neurologists have a specific term for this unique biological condition, an intensified sensory and emotional filter. Most average human brains have an automatic filter that easily discards 90% of surrounding environmental stimuli. Their brain completely ignores the unnecessary social data to save massive amounts of daily metabolic energy. But people who cry easily operate with a completely different, highly sensitive, and overloaded neurological filtering system. Your brain aggressively absorbs and processes every single piece of emotional information in the room simultaneously. And this is where the psychological reality becomes truly fascinating and deeply insightful for sensitive individuals. People who cry easily can almost always read a physical room significantly better than the average person. They instantly detect microscopic mood shifts, hidden irony, and invisible tension that everyone else completely ignores. They know exactly when someone is faking a smile or when the hidden tone of a conversation shifts. The sudden tears do not come from nowhere. They arrive directly after this intense, exhausting psychological reading. It is simply your physical body reacting to a massive, overwhelming accumulation of invisible emotional data. There is also a fascinating biological structure inside your brain, known specifically as the mirror neuron system. When you see someone experiencing deep sadness, these neurons fire, physically simulating that exact pain inside you. But in highly sensitive people, these powerful mirror neurons operate at absolute maximum volume all the time. This is exactly why you are so deeply and physically affected by movies, music, and real-life stories. It is never an exaggeration. Your brain physically reacts as if you are actually living the experience yourself. If you grew up in an unpredictable environment where the emotional climate shifted without any prior warning, where you had to know exactly when to stay quiet and when the silence was physically dangerous, your emotional detection system was forced to become incredibly sharp and permanently locked in overdrive. Here is the psychological truth that nobody tells you. Crying easily is not a sign of emotional instability. It means possessing a highly advanced nervous system that processes the world without filters and without anesthesia. But there is a darker, more frustrating side to this biological reality that you urgently need to understand. Your physical body reacts violently before your rational, logical mind can even attempt to intervene. This is why you constantly tell yourself, I really shouldn't be crying over something this incredibly small. Rationally, you know the situation isn't serious, but the heavy emotion has already been processed physically. It instantly becomes a tight chest, a lump in your throat, and falling tears before logic steps in. People who cry easily are almost always holding back significantly more internal pain than they ever reveal. The sudden crying is usually the painful end of a long, silent process, not the actual beginning. Before that single tear fell, there were hours, days, or even long weeks of intense, agonizing self-control. And when the tears finally overflow, you face the harsh judgment of others, but mainly from yourself. Highly sensitive people are incredibly self-critical. The emotion eventually passes, the tears stop, but the dark shame remains. Many judge themselves far more harshly for the physical act of crying than the actual trigger itself. They spend the rest of the day agonizing, acting as if the tears were a massive character flaw. Even when the physical reaction was completely proportional, you suddenly view yourself as the primary problem. And worst of all, these individuals are typically phenomenal listeners but absolutely terrible at asking for help. They deeply understand others, catch the unspoken words, and know exactly when someone needs silent, comforting space. They offer profound emotional support without ever needing to be asked, constantly absorbing other people's heavy pain. But when it is their turn to break down, they feel immense, crushing guilt for taking up space. They genuinely believe they are being a dramatic burden, so they swallow the pain and hide the struggle. They fiercely hold it all inside until it violently overflows, usually entirely alone in a locked bathroom. This suppressed emotion does not magically vanish. It stays physically trapped and accumulated deep inside the body. Until eventually, the smallest, most insignificant inconvenience acts as a massive trigger, releasing absolutely everything at once. It looks completely disproportionate to the outside world, but it is just the release of hidden, accumulated trauma. And here lies the ultimate danger, when you never learn to translate complex emotions into spoken words. Your physical body is forced to translate that heavy emotional pain directly into uncontrollable, sudden tears. The crying itself is not the problem. The problem is that crying became your only emotional language. You must painfully learn to vocalize exactly what bothers you before the pressure physically overflows into tears. Saying simple things like, "I didn't like that tone," or "I really need a minute to process this." These short, direct boundaries require intense daily practice, not raw strength, and you will stumble at first. You will feel incredibly awkward, convinced that you are being annoying, dramatic, or entirely too demanding. But you must force yourself to repeat this uncomfortable process until vocalizing boundaries becomes entirely automatic. Remember that not all tears are the same. Sometimes it is genuine, profound empathy for another human being. And sometimes it is deeply buried frustration, representing everything you have been silently carrying for years. Treating every single emotional reaction as just the way I am prevents you from understanding the real root. If you constantly live in a state of emotional exhaustion, always hovering dangerously right on the absolute edge, desperately avoiding normal social situations just out of fear of breaking down, seek a professional psychologist. Not to magically stop you from crying, but to help you construct healthy, impenetrable emotional boundaries without guilt. When highly sensitive individuals are finally placed in safe, quiet, and deeply supportive environments, they truly flourish. With less noise, less judgment, less chaos, and less constant psychological stimulation bombarding their overloaded brain, the frequent crying naturally and peacefully decreases without any forced effort or complicated psychological techniques. Not because your fundamental personality magically changed, but because the environment finally stopped draining your biological energy. You finally have the remaining energy to do more than just emotionally survive every single agonizing day. Fiercely protect your environment. Carefully choose exactly where and with whom you spend your limited emotional energy. It is not dramatic fragility. It is a fundamental biological necessity for your long-term mental health and survival. Never let the world convince you that feeling things deeply and quickly is a fundamental flaw to be fixed. Crying easily is not a defect. It is profound high sensitivity in a world that worships emotional anesthesia. If you recognize yourself in this psychological breakdown, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Subscribe to the channel for more deep psychological dives and share this with someone who really needs to hear it.